How was Parent Powered's trauma informed program developed? I love talking about this. And I think the reason why is that the development of Ready for K Trauma Informed is really a story. And it's a story that speaks to the urgent need to support the growing number of families impacted by trauma. So the first tool we developed, and many of you might also be using this with families, was Ready for K Core. It's an evidence-based family engagement program delivered via text message with a whole child curriculum that primarily focuses on math, literacy, and social and emotional skills. And it's an amazing program, and it quickly scaled across the country. And it really didn't take long before communities started reaching out to us and asking if we'd create some additional content just for them. So the first request came from a small rural coastal town, and their community was experiencing trauma at a higher rate than the surrounding towns. Community members weren't getting the services they desperately needed to navigate challenge. Their suicide rates were exceptionally high. They wanted custom messages that would help parents and caregivers build resilience, messages that would help them recognize signs of stress, and messages that would really encourage families to reach out for help and connect families to those critical local resources. So we created custom messages specifically addressing those needs. But then in the busy heart of the East Bay, this request was echoed. So too many families were experiencing isolation as a result of trauma, and they wanted messages that would help their vibrant and growing immigrant population connect with others and really build those systems of support that we know are proven to buffer trauma. We made messages for them. Then on the opposite coast, the country's largest city reached out, and they wanted messages that would help vulnerable families advocate for themselves and their children. And again, we created custom content. And around that time, we were like, wait a minute, we need to create a dedicated program, because the call for trauma-informed supports kept coming. And this really isn't surprising, because in rural communities and urban communities, in suburbs across the country, families are experiencing challenge and adversity at unprecedented levels. So this is where we really rolled up our sleeves and got to work building Ready for K Trauma Informed so that families everywhere across the country could receive this critical support. The program was informed by mental health experts and agencies, community health workers, parents impacted by trauma, and providers across the country. We wanted all voices that could speak to this experience from all different perspectives. We created this content through the lens of the 4 R's. And if you're not familiar with the 4 R's, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration defines a trauma-informed approach as one that first realizes the widespread impact of trauma and pathways to recovery, recognizes trauma signs and symptoms, and then responds by integrating awareness about trauma into all facets of the system. And finally, works to resist re-traumatization of trauma-impacted individuals by really decreasing the occurrence of unnecessary triggers. Now, if you look carefully at those 4 R's, they actually are describing the quality of a responsive, understanding, and trusting relationship. One where we listen deeply, we observe, and we remain open, and we come to understand what individuals need by understanding their experiences and then their feelings about those experiences. So as a remote support, it's tricky. We're not in the room with people. So this is why we bring in so many voices when we're creating our content. And we ask ourselves a core set of questions with each message we write to help ensure that we establish these trusting and supportive relationships with families. And I'm just going to quickly share those questions with you now. And you can apply this to actually your own work with families. So first we ask, are there triggers or things that are going to activate a stress response in families? That meant vetting our existing content, that core content, with mental health professionals who reviewed the messages for any language or reference that might act as a trigger for a parent or child impacted by trauma. We ask ourselves, are we scaffolding? For us, this is all about careful sequencing. We want to ensure that each skill we are building was built from a secure foundation. So we call it building new skills on top of known skills. Also, is it accessible? As Fran mentioned, this is a cornerstone of our approach and one that we manifest through accessible strength-based language and delivering content through texting, which you know is the most universal technology. We also ask ourselves, is it equitable? And that means making the activities ones that never require additional materials or setup, as Fran was explaining, and bringing in experts to vet our content through a wide range of lived experiences. We also ask ourselves, is it culturally biased? When we translate into different languages, we have to make sure it's also versioned to be culturally responsive. And finally, are we recognizing and validating this person's strength? Again, this program is about leveraging parents' unique and irreplaceable role in their children's lives, and we do this in every message we send. Now, looking at that core program that I was telling you about through the lens of these 4 R's and through the protective factors framework and through the eyes of trauma-informed experts and trauma-impacted individuals, we did 2 sort of overarching things to that core content. One, we created a whole lot of new messaging, right? Messages related to mental health, resilience, and parental self-care, to name a few, a whole lot of additional SEL content. But we also edited and revised many of our existing messages to remove potential triggers and offer even more scaffolded support to account, for parents' own negative experiences that they may have had with their own schooling growing up. And we just wanted to show you some examples of what those little tweaks, those smaller tweaks, look like, because you might find this quite relevant to the work you're doing with families. So as I mentioned, we added scaffolding, and what you see up on your screen, on the left-hand side, you see a message, the first literacy message from our core program, and on the right, you see trauma informed. In our core program, we might jump right into a message related to a dialogic reading strategy, right? Well, in our trauma informed program, we first want to let families know sharing books builds your bond. It's okay to read in any language you like. It's okay to make mistakes. It is okay to read just by describing the pictures, that it is your voice that makes books special. Again, we're just laying that foundation before we jump into these, more discrete strategies. We want to first say, hey, you've got this. And again, this is to account for negative experiences or inhibitions that families may have around some of these academic topics. As I mentioned, we also scour for triggers, and you have to look pretty closely to notice the difference between core and TI with these samples, but give it a little look. You'll see that we have removed snuggling. So we know in our core program, we're suggesting, snuggling with your child as you talk about your day. In our trauma-informed program, that looks a little bit different. And the reason why is that we know that snuggling and very close physical contact can be activating. It can activate a stress response in individuals impacted by physical trauma. So in our trauma-informed program message of the same type, we suggest sitting together or holding hands. We want to give families a comfortable point of entry into these activities. Then I'll just kind of flash up on screen. We talked about some of the additional messages we created. Again, a lot of additional self-care messages. And many of these are parent facing. And of course, we added that whole new stream, the community support stream, and we'll talk about that in much greater depth shortly. But, we know that for parents to be able to successfully support their children through adversity and challenge, they need to be doing things for themselves. And we really work in this program to be offering up strategies and reflective moments where parents can really buffer their own negative experiences.